So, backtracking a little bit to, well, not necessarily Reinos, but just mariachi in general. How was kind of like your journey to getting, to that point? And you know, because I know it kind of started off with your father since he was a mariachi.
Yeah, well, like I've said before, without my dad's history, there is no my history. So, my dad, Mark Fogelquist, who is not of Mexican descent, he's of Swedish descent, got involved in mariachi music in an unconventional way. My grandfather, his father, was a Spanish professor at UCLA, and so Spanish and Latin American cultures had always been a part of like his childhood and his upbringing. So whenever my grandfather would take like a sabbatical or be invited to give a presentation or a summer series of courses or something, the family would go. So my dad, I guess when my dad was 13, my dad started playing the violin when he was 9. In the school strings program, and had a teacher and so forth. And when he was 13, the family took a trip to Guadalajara. My grandfather was teaching there for the summer. And on the first night, they had a welcome ceremony at a hotel. They had a mariachi. And my dad said that that was the first time that he had seen a mariachi. And he was just so blown away by it. And he had never heard this kind of music, but it was the most exciting music he had ever heard in his life. And so he spent the summer kind of seeking out mariachis, get excited anytime that there would be a mariachi. But at the end of the summer, they went back to Los Angeles, and he never saw a mariachi ever again until he went to UCLA. And there was a flyer advertising a mariachi concert at UCLA, and he went and saw it and talked to whoever was running it and became a part of it, and eventually took leadership of the group. And it was a student group. It was the first student group out of any educational institution in existence. Eventually, yeah, he took leadership of the group, and many of the students who had played in the group for a long time decided to follow their normal career path. They were, became architects or engineers or whatever, and moved on. And my dad didn't. He stayed with the mariachi and eventually opened up a restaurant in Orange County near Disneyland. And he opened his restaurant in 1981. Then I was born in 1983. And so from the time I was born, I was there every Sunday listening to mariachi music. My mom would take me and we'd spend the whole Sunday there.
Yeah. And
And
at the time, sorry, and at the
uh-huh.
time, was that already Mariachi Uclatlan that was there?
Yes,
Or
Mariachi Uclatlan was the mariachi from UCLA, right?
oh, okay.
It's Ucla. That's where
Oh,
that comes from. Yeah. So Mariachi Uclatlan was a group from UCLA that eventually became the professional group Mariachi Uclatlan.
oh, okay.
And that was the group that was featured at my dad's restaurant. Like I said, a lot of the students that were original members of that group dropped out, followed their career path, their intended career paths. My dad stuck around, but anytime someone would leave, like a student would leave, he would import or invite like a traditional like Mexican mariachi musician to fill the spot because they had so much work. And of course, a lot of the students fell by the wayside because they couldn't keep up with the demands of the group. So the group was really popular in Los Angeles and began getting a lot of jobs. And if you're trying to juggle a new career and the mariachi, it just wasn't going to happen. Like the mariachi was a full-time thing at
Yeah.
that time. So that's how it transitioned from like a student group to having more musicians that were actual like mariachis, like brought up in the tradition in Mexico.
Yeah.
And eventually he ended up with the professional group Mariachi Uclatlan. That was a group that was featured at his restaurant in Orange County. He had the restaurant for 12 years. So from 1981 to 1993. And in 1993, he was kind of burnt out of having to run the restaurant and the mariachi, because on top of just playing at the restaurant Wednesday through Sunday, 5 nights a week, they also played extra jobs on the side,
Yeah.
right? And so, plus having to take care of the restaurant and all the responsibilities that come with that. And so it just so happened that some bilingual educators from Wenatchee, Washington, which is this small agricultural town, were in Orange County for a bilingual teachers convention
Hmm.
and had dinner at my dad's restaurant and started talking to him. And by the end of that conversation, they asked my dad to send a resume. And shortly thereafter, we were moving to Washington where my dad was going to become a bilingual teacher. So my dad didn't have a degree in teaching, but they were so desperate for teachers, bilingual teachers, to move to this town that had been predominantly white since its existence and had a huge influx of Mexican immigrants, primarily from Michoacan, these rural towns in Michoacan, and had nobody to teach them because nobody was bilingual there. It just wasn't part of the demographic of the town. So they hired my dad, and he had never taught. He was hired as a middle school ESL, Spanish for native speakers, social studies in Spanish, and math in Spanish. And he had never taught middle school, he had never been in a middle school, he says, since he was a middle schooler. So anyway, he took the job, and we moved to Washington when I was 10, the summer that I turned 10. A year later, the woman in charge of bilingual studies there in the district gave my dad some money to start a mariachi class. And she said, if you get 15 students to sign up for it, we'll pay for it. And on the first day, nearly 50 students showed up for the class.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but nobody had any musical experience whatsoever. It was zero. But it was all these Mexicanos who were missing a piece of home. And hey, there's a mariachi class at our school now. What's this about? He just took the class and ran with it, and worked really, really, really hard and built up a group. I would say at about the third year of the group's existence, it really kind of gelled into like a mariachi. Of course, we would raise money playing jobs all over, and we played all over North Central Washington. We played all over the Pacific Northwest. And we did a lot of really cool events. I mean, we played for the governor a couple of times and just did a lot of fun things. There's a huge folk life festival in Seattle that we got to do, that we got to play for a few times. A huge Fiestas Patrias celebration in Seattle that we would also go to. And that was a lot of fun, and really got to know the state because Wenatchee was so isolated that like a lot of our jobs would end up being like 2 or so hours away. So we'd have to travel,
Yeah.
2 hours before we even started playing. I don't know, it was really cool. It was a really unique experience. And so I obviously played in the group with my dad until I graduated from high school, and that's when I was invited to play Mariachi Uclatlan in Los Angeles, and I had decided to go to school in LA. And so like even more so, like Jose was like, well, of course, like you have a spot in the group. My dad had been quite known for his success there in Washington, that he was also recruited by some teachers in San Diego, in South San Diego, in Chula Vista,
Hmm.
California, to teach mariachi music there. And since I was going to school in LA and I don't have siblings, and we didn't have any other family there in Washington, my parents decided to move to San Diego, and my dad accepted that position to teach mariachi music full time. So he was teaching, instead of teaching, like the ESL and all those other classes, he was just teaching mariachi music. He taught in a middle school and in a high school from 2001 until 2013 when he retired, and I was in LA. So yeah, so that's kind of his history and how he got involved, and in turn how I got involved.
And in between all of that, with Mariachi Uclatlan, there was a couple names that were in that group, right? That also ended up being pretty well known. at the
Oh
time,
yeah,
right?
like Javier Serrano, Pancho Loco,
Hmm.
was his trumpet player for a long time. Heriberto Molina, who was the lead singer of Mariachi Vargas for 32 or 33 years, was a member of his group. Hipólito Puentes, who has been directing Mariachi Internacional de Mexico for many years now, but was also musical director of his group. Juan Manuel Cortés, who is a renowned arranger in the mariachi world, was also the musical director of his group. Jaime Alejo, who played with the Galleros for a long time, was also the guitarrón player for his group. So he had a lot of really good musicians. Santiago Maldonado, who played with Juan Gabriel's mariachi for about 9 years, was the harpist for my dad's group for a long time too.
Oh,
So he
wow.
had he had a lot of impressive musicians in his group
Yeah.
over the years.